All right. So, hello there. And if you're listening, which clearly you are, if you're hearing the words coming out of my mouth, thank you so much for listening. And I am in the Meditation Mind Discord server, and I am alone with, I should say, again, I'm not alone. I'm with Craig, the recording bot. I'm very slowly going through On the Path. And I left off with Sutta 38 last week. And starting up this week with Sutta 39 at the bottom of page 94, appropriate attention. So, definitely one of my favorite topics here. Looking forward to getting into this. With regard to internal factors, I don't envision any other single factor like appropriate attention as doing so much for a monk in training who has not attained the heart's goal but remains intent on the unsurpassed safety from the yoke. A monk who attends appropriately abandons what is unskillful and develops what is skillful. And here, where I'm kind of outside of my field of expertise here, I just see ITI 16, see also Sutta 229 under right effort, and Sutta 269 under right mindfulness, which we'll be getting into a little bit later on. So I'm not sure what the ITI means, but I'm sure it's referring to another sutta, perhaps, eh? So this is a bold statement. Buddha says that he can't think of any other single factor that would be as beneficial as cultivating appropriate attention. I was actually talking about this earlier today in this same wonderful sutta. This same wonderful server. And the term flow, a flow state, that psychological concept kind of entered the conversation. And was talking a little bit about how, to my mind, one of the greatest gifts that you can cultivate for yourself is meditation, concentration meditation, or training the attention, which can really help in kind of teaching yourself how to induce flow. So it makes sense to me. It makes a lot of sense to me that Buddha would regard this idea of training attention as the most important or single most significant factor. And he's really specific here. For a specific kind of student, he says, for the kind of monk who hasn't yet attained the heart's goal, but remains intent on the unsurpassed safety from the yoke. So, just as I always do here, I'll speak to what I think this means. The monk who has not attained the heart's goal. Well, I'm not a monk, I'm a layperson. But but because I am Buddhist, a lay Buddhist, it helps me to speak about it if I can kind of apply it to my own life, because that's what I know. I know my life. The heart's goal. Well, when I think about what the heart's goal means in Buddhism, what I've been taught, what I've come to suspect through reading and through admirable friendship and Sangha and teachers and voices, the heart's goal would be unhindered, the unhindered mind. Yeah, free from samsara, free from the cycle of rebirth, unbinding, disidentification with. I'm assuming that is what is meant here by not attaining the heart's goal, but remains intent on the unsurpassed safety from the yoke. The yoke, again, being that binding, being bound. When you think of a yoke, right? I know that oftentimes when we're reading these English translations and you're thinking about the kind of colloquial nature of Buddhism, and so a lot of the stories are very cultural and they're very true to the period, so a yoke, I'll drop a picture of this in the thread. in the Discord server for this particular book club, but what does a yoke look like? This big, heavy, wooden contraption that you would put on a bull or an ox to kind of contain it, bind it, restrain it. And so if you can think of it in those terms, right, that was the function of a yoke on an animal in Buddha's time, then yeah, a monk, or I'll speak for myself as well, I would like to be free. I would like to be free from the yoke. I would like to experience unsurpassed safety from the yoke. Unsurpassed safety. Interesting. So what this suggests to me is that through training in attention, one would absolutely be guaranteed delivery from rebirth. That's what I'm taking from this here. That's pretty cool. I think I'm going to keep on training. Yeah. But I'm not a monk also, I don't train to that degree. And so there you go. So clearly, attention is important. Appropriate attention. Again, thinking about earlier sections of the book and this idea of the fire of the mind, right? Or the idea of the Eightfold Path being a map to the fire escape, and the mind, a house on fire. And this is why we train, right? Again, going back to the core, the kind of core of the Buddhist view here, that our mind, our experience of reality is nothing more than this kind of illusory, impermanent, sort of constructed and not real kind of virtual reality contingent upon our conditioning, our culture, our language, our embodied state, right? So how we come into the world. And considering earlier sections of the book too, because it's all fabricated, and because, again, in Buddhism, there's this idea of cause and effect, right? There's this idea of everything has a cause, including thought. And so, again, going back to earlier sections of the book, either in the introduction or chapter 1, this translation uses the specific term feeding. So we feed our mind, right? So what are we feeding the mind with? Well, I don't know. What are you feeding your mind with? Are you feeding your mind with hours and hours a day of doom scrolling on social media? Are you feeding your mind with hateful, harmful, maybe unskillful activities? Or are you feeding your mind with positive, reinforcing, skillful, and strategic ideas, people, experiences? We don't always have control over this, right? We don't always have control over this. We don't always have, in fact, we don't usually, right? We frequently don't have control over external conditions, right? But we can, again, we can train in attention. We can train in attention where we put our attention. Yeah, good stuff. So Sutta 40. And again, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about this. Admirable friendship. With regard to external factors, I don't envision any other single factor like friendship with admirable people as doing so much for a monk in training who has not attained the heart's goal, but remains intent on the unsurpassed safety from the yoke. A monk who is a friend with admirable people abandons what is unskillful and develops what is skillful. And again, this is from ITI 17, and forgive me, I'm not sure which one that is. I'm looking forward, as I said, to exploring many more of these teachings. So we've got two really critical factors here. The Buddha says that he can't think of a single more important internal factor for a monk in training than cultivating attention, appropriate attention, skillful attention. And he can't think of a more important external factor than the admirable friend. The admirable friend. And as I spoke last week, I'll just speak for myself, again, reiterating that I, for one, find that I just can't make progress by myself. That's speaking for me. And I'm a very introverted person, and by nature, I prefer quiet and, kind of quiet and solitary activities. But this is not to say that I do not value and appreciate and lean on admirable friendship. I also find, as I mentioned last week, that admirable friendship kind of comes and goes for me. Just like everything else in life comes and goes. Nothing's permanent, right? And so, there's been a lot of flux in my life, and right now I'm kind of in short supply of admirable friendship. And as I mentioned before, looking forward to kind of settling down and taking action to find voices that align with my commitment to Buddhism. And particularly, I'm looking forward to finding a teacher that can help me, or guide, I prefer the word guide, that can help me to further enrich my practice. And I appreciate this, and I'm sorely missing it in my life right now. Yeah, so makes sense to me. Sutta 41. As he was seated to one side, Venerable Ananda said to the Blessed One, "This is half of the holy life, Lord, having admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues." Don't say that, Ananda. Don't say that. Having admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues is actually the whole of the holy life. When a monk has admirable people and friends, companions, and colleagues, he can be expected to develop and pursue the Noble Eightfold Path. And how does a monk who has admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues develop and pursue the Noble Eightfold Path? There is the case where a monk develops right view dependent on seclusion, dependent on dispassion, dependent on cessation, resulting in letting go. He develops right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, dependent on seclusion, dispassion, cessation, resulting in letting go. This is how a monk who has admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues develops and pursues the Noble Eightfold Path. And through this line of reasoning, one may know how having admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues is actually the whole of the holy life. It is in dependence on me as an admirable friend that beings subject to birth have gained release from birth, that beings subject to aging have gained release from aging, that beings subject to death have gained release from death, that beings subject to sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair have gained release from sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. And that was SN 45:2. And so here, Buddha is talking about how important admirable friendship is, but he's also saying that, he is also an admirable friend, that we can think of Buddha as a friend, that we have admirable friendship with him. I actually really find that very helpful personally for myself, that in Buddhism, Siddhartha Gautama wasn't a god. He wasn't a man who became a god. He was a man born of high caste who shrugged everything off to try to get enlightenment. And through that process, kind of discovered that that's just not quite how it works, for himself at least. And that, a middle way in the end proved to make him feel free of the burden of the egoic mind, right? And he says, hey, here's how I did it. You can do it too. And he devoted his life to teaching. And so he's a guide. He's a friend. He's my friend. That works for me really well. Sutta 42. And what does it mean to have admirable people as friends? There is the case where a lay person in whatever town or village he may dwell, associates with householders or householders' sons, young or old, who are consummate in conviction, consummate in virtue, consummate in generosity, consummate in discernment. He talks with them, engages them in discussions. He emulates consummate conviction in those who are consummate in conviction, consummate in virtue, those who are consummate in virtue, consummate generosity, and those who are consummate in generosity and consummate discernment, and those who are consummate in discernment. This is called having admirable people as friends. And what does it mean to be consummate in conviction? There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones has conviction, is convinced of the Tathagata's awakening. Again, I'll do some research here to make sure I understand what Tathagata is. Indeed, the Blessed One is worthy and rightly self-awakened, consummate in knowledge and conduct, well gone, an expert with regard to the cosmos, unexcelled as a trainer for those people fit to be tamed, the teacher of divas and human beings awakened blessed. This is called being consummate in conviction. So just so I don't get too bogged down for myself, because this is dense and this is very difficult for me to try to understand and make accessible for myself. So I'm just going to go back to the first paragraph in Sutta 42. So I would be considered a householder in so much as that I believe that householder also means layperson, which simply means that I'm not a monk, or that a householder is not a monk. They haven't decided to break off from the typical kind of life that one lives in the world and to choose a monastic life, right? Again, this idea of cessation, right? So donning robes, taking alms, probably shaving the head, and dwindling one's life down to very simple tasks all in the service of practicing some of these really rich concepts within the Noble Eightfold Path, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So what does it mean to be consummate in virtue? There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones abstains from taking life, abstains from stealing, abstains from sexual misconduct, abstains from lying, abstains from taking intoxicants that cause heedlessness. This is called being consummate in virtue. And what does it mean to be consummate in generosity? There is the case of a disciple of the noble ones, his awareness cleansed of the stain of miserliness, living at home, freely generous, open-handed, delighting in being magnanimous, responsive to requests, delighting in the distribution of alms. This is called being consummate in generosity. And I have to assume that this comes before discernment, because some of what was just said here doesn't quite line up with discernment. And so perhaps that's why discernment here comes last. And what does it mean to be consummate in discernment? There is the case where a disciple of the noble ones is discerning, endowed with discernment of arising and passing away, noble, penetrating, leading to the right ending of stress. This is called being consummate in discernment. Generosity, absolutely, but also the Buddha's always been very clear that it's just generosity with discernment. So it's not just this kind, here where he says, delighting in being responsive to requests. Well, not any request, right? It would be a request that comes from discernment, a skillful request. So the discernment of arising and passing away. Yes, absolutely. Everything is impermanent, right? Everything in life arises and passes away. We ourselves, we are born and we pass away. For a disciple who has conviction in the teacher's message and lives to penetrate it, what accords with the Dhamma is this: The Blessed One is the teacher. I am a disciple. He is the one who knows, not I. For a disciple who has conviction in the teacher's message and lives to penetrate it, the teacher's message is healing and nourishing. For a disciple who has conviction in the teacher's message and lives to penetrate it, what accords with the Dhamma is this: gladly would I let the flesh and blood in my body dry up, leaving just the skin, tendons, and bones. But if I have not attained what can be reached through human firmness, human persistence, human striving, there will be no relaxing my persistence. For a disciple who has conviction in the teacher's message and lives to penetrate it, one of two fruits can be expected: either gnosis here and now, or, if there be any remnant of clinging, sustenance, non-return. And that's MN 70. So I guess I'm the disciple who has conviction in the teacher's message. I'm definitely, as if anybody is listening to this and has listened regularly, then you know that I'm not a particularly, religious person. I don't worship a God concept. I don't worship Buddha, nor did Buddha want to be worshipped or considered himself a god. But I do consider myself a disciple of Buddhist teachings. I do have faith and confidence in the teachings, and I do attempt to understand them in a non-monastic way, in a lay person's way, and largely because when I first was exposed to the teachings, at that time, they resonated. They made sense to me. They were logical to me. And as I practiced, I saw some things for myself, and I saw some results for myself that helped me to reinforce and to fortify my confidence in the Buddhist teachings. So I guess right here, I am that disciple. And he says that one of two fruits can be expected by my decision, right? Or anyone's decision to follow the Eightfold Path, or to kind of trust in and have confidence in the Buddha's teachings. And this isn't a blind faith or a blind confidence, which you already know, right? Because it's been reiterated over and over again so far and will continue to be, which is that the Buddha always said, see for yourself. And so the fruits, or the outcomes. So either gnosis in the here and now, knowledge right here, right now, right? So the Buddha says, hey, you really practice this? You really follow this path and you put it into practice? You're going to see for yourself gnosis in the here and now, right here. Well, you'll see for yourself, right? So again, there's that promise again. And, you might be able to really realize it, right? The full unbinding. I can't imagine that, quite frankly. I've had glimpses, moments, but yeah, I've had gnosis. I've had moments of insight like this. Yeah, I don't find that I feel particularly compelled to seek them out, but I do find that they can arise, particularly with longer periods of meditation. So that's one of the fruits, right? The other, he says, is if there's any remnant of clinging, right? So, yeah, if we're hanging on to anything in this life, this idea that a non-returner, according to Buddhism, anagami, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, they consider it to be a very high stage of enlightenment, wherein you will be reborn into a higher realm, a non-human form. And again, all of this is a reach for me, right? This is a big reach for me because we're getting into the supernatural now. And that's always challenging for me. But that's really interesting, and again, I'm trying to just maintain beginner's mind because I don't know. But this idea of clinging, right? That we might be clinging to something. We might still be clinging to something here in this worldly life, but in the pursuit of, right? I don't like the word in the pursuit of, but we might still be clinging. And again, going back to, this idea of reincarnation and karma arising, and perhaps we're still clinging because, that is our, deep conditioned state, that which we came into this world, that's our karma ripening, right? So again, I'll stay away from this now, but doing a lot of reading as I read to help me understand what's being said here. And fascinating stuff and way outside of my cultural upbringing, but I'm staying open and really interesting. Sutta 44, monks. Could a person of no integrity know of a person of no integrity? This is a person of no integrity. No, Lord. Good, monks. It's impossible. There's no way that a person of no integrity would know of a person of no integrity. This is a person of no integrity. Could a person of no integrity know of a person of integrity? This is a person of integrity. No, Lord. Good, monks. It's impossible. There's no way that a person of no integrity would know of a person of integrity. This is a person of integrity. A person of no integrity is endowed with dhammas of no integrity. He is a person of no integrity in his friendship, in the way he wills, the way he gives advice, the way he speaks, the way he acts, the views he holds, and the way he gives a gift. So he's saying here that if someone lacks integrity, they wouldn't even recognize it in somebody else. Integrity. Right? How could you recognize something that you yourself don't have? So could a person of no integrity know of a person of no integrity? Quote, this is a person of no integrity. In other words, this is what they would say. And he's saying no, because a person who doesn't have any integrity wouldn't recognize integrity. They wouldn't recognize it in themselves. They wouldn't recognize it in someone else. They don't recognize it because their own mind is clouded by unethical behavior and thought streams. So they wouldn't recognize it. They lack self-awareness and the discernment that you would need to understand integrity, know what it is, recognize it in themselves, recognize it in someone else. Could a person of no integrity know a person of integrity? Quote, this is a person of integrity. So a person without any ethical grounding, right? Because again, Buddhism, is a training in ethics. If you're not training in that, and if you don't have any ethical ground to stand on, maybe you don't operate by that narrative. Ethics isn't something that arises in the mind. Once again, then you're not going to recognize integrity in someone. Integrity will not be something that one can recognize. So the Buddha is kind of suggesting that to understand integrity, well, one needs to have a certain level of personal virtue themselves and moral clarity themselves. And people who don't have integrity, they don't have this kind of clarity. And I find this really, really helpful. Certainly, I find it very, very helpful in terms of helping me to understand this concept of people are just doing the best that they can. I've heard that expression a lot. One shouldn't judge others. They're doing the best that they can. Well, this is sort of, I think, speaking to that idea. But if I'm reading this right, then really what that's saying is an unethical person doing their best is still unethical, right? To an ethical person. And again, this goes back to earlier sections of the book where he's talking to his son. right? And he's saying, son, the reason why we train in some of this is because people who are already sensitive, maybe because their karma has ripened and they come into this world sensitive, or they train in the mind and they become sensitive, they can see the lack of integrity in you. They see it in your actions. They see it in your words. They see it in your behaviors. You may not see it because you don't have it, integrity, but they do have it, so they see your lack of it. So he says it's impossible. There's no way that a person of no integrity would know of a person of no integrity or a person of integrity. So again, this idea that if one doesn't have any integrity, they're not really going to be able to really see the true nature in other people. They're not going to have that level of discernment and subtlety. That's their own lack of moral development and ethical development that's keeping them from that. And I think that's why, the Buddha reiterates, do the work. There's a lot on the line here, So, I think this whole passage is really, the Buddha's really kind of emphasizing again that ethics in Buddhism and in following the Eightfold Path, ethical virtue it's foundational to perceiving and understanding others. Empathy, right? Their ethics or lack of ethics. If a person's lacking integrity themselves, then they're not really going to be able to judge others because their own blindness and ignorance to their own unskillfulness is distorting their perception of reality like a funhouse mirror. And so again, I think this is why Buddha says it's so important to cultivate virtue, not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others, to help so that we can cultivate clarity and discernment. Worth cultivating. I think it was right here. And how is a person of no integrity in his friendship? There's the case where a person of no integrity has, as his friend and companions, those contemplatives and Brahmins who are lacking in conviction, lacking in shame, lacking in compunction, unlearned, lazy, of muddled mindfulness and poor discernment. This is how a person of no integrity is a person of no integrity in his friendship. And how is a person of no integrity a person of no integrity in the way he wills? There is the case where a person of no integrity wills for his own affliction, or for the affliction of others, or for the affliction of both. This is how a person of no integrity is a person of no integrity in the way he wills. And how is a person of no integrity a person of no integrity in the way he gives advice? There is the case where a person of no integrity gives advice for his own affliction, or for the affliction of others, or for the affliction of both. This is how a person of no integrity is a person of no integrity in the way he gives advice. And so he's kind of going one by one down each of these. And so let me just back up the truck a little bit here, going back to the friendship. So again, I think this is pretty, I'd say this is pretty cut and dry here. If we don't have any integrity in our friendship, then once again, we're not being discerning, right? So we are either being the kind of friend or keeping friends that, as he puts it here, right? They are lazy. They don't practice particularly good discernment, which means that their behavior is not particularly skillful or mindful, which means they may be causing harm to themselves or others, right? They may be lacking in shame, right? That kind of healthy sense of shame, which kind of lets us know when we have been unskillful, when we have caused harm to ourselves and others. So if you lack integrity in relationship to friendship, then these are the kinds of people that you would probably consort with, or this is the kind of friend that you yourself would be. And the next stanza is talking about this idea of the way that we will, right? A person with no integrity, how do they will? So here he's suggesting that the person with no integrity, they will themselves to be harmed, right? Or others to be harmed, or they wish both. Nihilism, right? Wishing for sheer chaos, wishing to just everybody, may everybody be harmed. may everybody be afflicted. Or if I have to be afflicted, then so does everybody else. If I have to be in pain, then I want you to be in pain. If I have to be ashamed, then I want you to feel ashamed. Right? That's how someone with no integrity wills. Here he says that someone that doesn't have integrity, this is how they give advice. Again, they give advice for their own affliction. So maybe you're giving advice and you don't really understand, what the situation is. And so perhaps you're not in a position to really give advice, right? Again, going back to this idea of, in 12-step programs, this idea of your helping isn't helping. Or other sayings, that, we avoid giving unsolicited advice. Well, what's unsolicited advice? Advice that wasn't asked for, right? And sometimes giving advice when we don't know everything about the situation, that is not mindful, right? It's not helpful. It's not skillful. Or maybe we're giving advice out of our own delusion, right? Our own anger, our own greed, our own egoic kind of clinging. And again, that's not particularly skillful. Yeah, not particularly skillful, right? So right now my cat's annoying me, and lots of ways I could be with that. I'm just walking away. And how is the person of no integrity a person of no integrity in the way he speaks? There is the case where a person of no integrity is one who tells lies, engages in divisive speech, engages in harsh speech, engages in idle chatter. This is how a person of no integrity is a person of no integrity in the way he speaks. And how is a person of no integrity a person of no integrity in the way he acts? There is the case where a person of no integrity is one who takes life, steals, engages in sexual misconduct. This is how a person of no integrity is a person of no integrity in the way he acts. And how is a person of no integrity a person of no integrity in the views he holds? There is the case where a person of no integrity is one who holds a view like this. There is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed. There is no fruit or result of good or bad actions. There is no this world, no next world, no mother, no father, no spontaneously reborn beings, no contemplatives or Brahmins who, faring rightly and practicing rightly, proclaim this world and the next after, having directly known and realized it for themselves. This is how a person of no integrity is a person of no integrity in the views he holds. Wow, well, that's a pretty bold claim. I'd say many would find that to be fighting words there, Buddha. But we already know that Buddha had some pretty firm views, right? So he says, hey, as far as he's concerned, you don't have integrity if he doesn't see it from this perspective, if he doesn't view it from this perspective, right? And again, this is where he comes from his own conditioned state, right? Remember where he comes from. Remember that he comes from Hinduism. Remember that he comes from this idea of the one. He might find me to not fully have integrity here because I don't hook, line and sinker swallow this whole line. I don't swallow any line that I haven't seen for myself, right? And so this could be the point he's trying to make. This is where he might be saying that this is where I lack integrity, right? Because I don't just stomach all of this because he says so. Again, I have no teacher to tell me otherwise. And how is a person of no integrity a person of no integrity in the way he gives a gift? There is the case where a person of no integrity gives a gift inattentively, not with his own hand, disrespectfully, as if throwing it away, with the views that nothing will come of it. This is how a person of no integrity is a person of no integrity in the way he gives a gift. Now, monks, could a person of integrity know of a person of no integrity? This is a person of no integrity. Yes, Lord. Good monks, it is possible that a person of integrity would know of a person of no integrity. This is a person of no integrity. Could a person of integrity know of a person of integrity? This is a person of integrity? Yes, Lord. Good monks, It is possible that a person of integrity would know of a person of integrity. This is a person of integrity. A person of integrity is endowed with dhammas of integrity. He is a person of integrity in his friendship, in the way he wills, the way he gives advice, the way he speaks, the way he acts, the views he holds, and the way he gives a gift. These are the opposite of the corresponding attributes of the person of no integrity. And that was MN 110. Okay, so I actually came in a little bit later. And today, when I'm recording this part, I have a cold, so I might sound a little bit weird, a little bit different. But we're going to continue on. So let's do it. So this is Sutta 45. At that time, Venerable Rahula was staying at the Mango Stone. Something else for me to look up. Then the Blessed One, arising from his seclusion in the late afternoon, went to where Venerable Rahula was staying at the Mango Stone. Venerable Rahula saw him coming from afar, and on seeing him set out a seat and water for washing the feet. The Blessed One sat down on the seat, set out, and having sat down, washed his feet. Venerable Rahula, bowing down to the Blessed One, sat to one side. Then the Blessed One, having left a little bit of the remaining water in the water dipper, said to Venerable Rahula, "Rahula, do you see this little bit of remaining water left in the water dipper?" "Yes, sir." That's how little of a contemplative there is in anyone who feels no shame at telling a deliberate lie. Having tossed away the little bit of remaining water, the Blessed One said to Venerable Rahula, "Rahula, do you see how this little bit of remaining water is tossed away?" "Yes, sir." "Rahula, whatever there is of a contemplative in anyone who feels no shame at telling a deliberate lie is tossed away just like that." Having turned the water dipper upside down, the Blessed One said to Venerable Rahula, "Rahula, do you see how this water dipper is turned upside down?" "Yes, sir." "Rahula, whatever there is of a contemplative in anyone who feels no shame at telling a deliberate lie is turned upside down, just like that." Having turned the water dipper right side up, the Blessed One said to Venerable Rahula, "Rahula, do you see how empty and hollow this water dipper is?" "Yes, sir." "Rahula, whatever there is of a contemplative in anyone who feels no shame at telling a deliberate lie is empty and hollow, just like that." "Rahula, it's like a royal elephant. Immense, pedigreed, accustomed to battles, its tusks like chariot poles. Having gone into battle, it uses its forefeet and hind feet, its forequarters and hindquarters, its head and ears and tusks and tail, but will simply hold back its trunk. The elephant trainer notices that and thinks, this royal elephant has not given up its life to the king. But when the royal elephant, having gone into battle, uses its forefeet and hind feet, its forequarters and hindquarters, its head and ears and tusks and tail, and his trunk, the trainer notices that and thinks, this royal elephant has given up its life to the king. There is nothing it will not do. In this same way, Rahula, when anyone feels no shame in telling a deliberate lie, there is no evil, I tell you, he will not do. Thus, Rahula, you should train yourself. I will not tell a deliberate lie, even in jest. What do you think, Rahula? What is a mirror for? For reflection, sir. In the same way, Rahula, bodily actions, verbal actions, and mental actions are to be done with repeated reflection. Whenever you want to do a bodily action, Rahula, you should reflect on it. This bodily action I want to do, would it lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Would it be an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results? If on reflection you know that it would lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, it would be an unskillful bodily action with painful consequences, painful results, then any bodily action of that sort is absolutely unfit for you to do. But if on reflection you know that it would not cause affliction, it would be a skillful bodily action with pleasant consequences, pleasant results, then any bodily action of that sort is fit for you to do. Similarly with verbal and mental actions. Okay, so I think I'd take a little pause right here to kind of look back on this, beginning at the beginning of the sutta. And so the Blessed One, right, Buddha is using this pitcher or dipper, I guess, water dipper, to kind of represent what he says is the kind of the human mental relationship that a human would have with dishonesty. Dishonesty, lying intentionally, knowingly lying. So, again, he's just kind of taking us through this great metaphor using a very practical tool that Rolu would be well acquainted with, visually, and also kind of in an embodied way. When I think about how these stories are told, I can imagine in my mind Buddha sitting somewhere with his son, in this case probably near a water source or a bucket, and he's actually showing him, he's saying, hey, look at this. Do you see this? Look at that. Just like the sticks with the water. And I don't know if that's true, but even if it's not true, it's so accessible, right? The language. If we can't be honest, particularly with ourselves, well, it's kind of a prerequisite, right? We know that about the Eightfold Path. We know what the Buddha has to say about truthfulness. And again, going back to the idea of addiction, there comes a time in most people's experience, if one comes from a background of addiction, whether it be alcohol, or drugs or food, or any number of other things that we can be addicted to, right? There are these moments of clarity in which we have, wherein we can acknowledge whether or not what we're doing is harming ourselves. So when I'm engaging in an addiction, am I harming myself? Yes. When I'm engaging in an addiction, am I harming others? Now, again, going back to the Western, very old and, and helps a lot of people, the data, there's a lot of research on it. Okay. You can look it up for yourself, but the 12-step model, right? But this idea that, one of their steps, this idea of maybe can you see where your own addictive behavior has maybe done harm to others. And again, going back to this idea of the 4th step, which I've talked about before, right? If anybody at all is listening to this and maybe you have more familiarity with that model, but if we tell ourselves that we don't have a problem, that we're not harming ourselves and that we're not harming others, and we don't feel any kind of sense of shame around knowing that on some level that's not the truth, we just won't look at it. We just won't, right? Well, then you just can't progress. And I think that's really kind of what he's getting at here. That's kind of the larger kind of message that's being got at here in this sutta. And I love this. What do you think, Rahula? What is a mirror for? For reflection, sir. And here, I think the word confession is used here, but again, that can be a charged word for some. Okay. This is not that there's anything wrong with it. Again. Okay. But this does not have the same meaning as a Catholic confession would have. A different, not the same dynamic here, not the same relationship. And, again, if you were to go on and, and look at
the Pāli Canon, and you can kind of think of confession, again, because the Buddha is really clear, that we don't look to, in this particular practice, one is not relying on someone outside of oneself. This is work that one is doing in following the Eightfold Path. You have admirable friendship. You have another voice. But you're not confessing your sins. That's not the kind of dynamic that's happening here. That's not Buddhism. If you're looking at the traditional kind of, right? And so confession can mean confessing to an admirable friend, confessing to, that's pretty much it, right? An admirable friend, of which Buddha, the teacher, was one back when he was teaching, right? But it can also mean to oneself, confessing to yourself. And once again, going back to the 12-step model, if you're more familiar with that model, consider the function of the fourth step. And a Buddhist would say, well, that step it's absolutely profound. It's probably the meat and potatoes of recovery in that program. An honest self-reflection. If you're lying to yourself, then what is the point of that? Why? Right? At a certain point, one must be brave. One must face oneself squarely. Am I harming myself? Am I harming others? Or both? Buddha's really suggesting here that it's kind of our responsibility, that if we're choosing to follow the Eightfold Path, if we're committing to that, right? And even in the 12-step program, you'll hear said, half measures avail us nothing. That basically is the metaphor of the water dipper, isn't it? You're just lying to yourself. Yeah. Having done a mental action, you should reflect on it. This mental action I have done, did it lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Was it an unskillful mental action with painful consequences, painful results? If on reflection, you know that it led to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, it was an unskillful mental action with painful consequences, painful results. Then you should feel distressed, ashamed, and disgusted with it. Feeling distressed, you should exercise restraint in the future. But if on reflection you know that it did not lead to affliction, it was a skillful mental action with pleasant consequences, pleasant results, then you should stay mentally refreshed and joyful, training day and night in skillful Dhammas. So this is MN 61. Well, this is such a big one for me that I have a mental habit of mind, one that's been well-oiled, again, as I've talked about in previous episodes. And it's one that I work with regularly. We train skillfully day and night in the Dhammas. Well, one of those, right, is we'll get to the rites, but what are the thoughts that we are continuing to think? Now, some of this we can see through reflection and we can, lots of different ways that one can do that. And some are much more subtle. Some I saw through the help of outside help. A lot I saw through just kind of some radical practices and just kind of some radical seeing, which is basically what Buddha promises will happen if you practice this stuff. Again, he says, see for yourself. And in my experience, you will. And you know what's so great? Well, you might, I don't know how you feel about it, but I again, remember that I don't find particularly that, Buddha's voice is hyperbolic, but here you hear words like distressed, ashamed, and disgusted. We're seeing a lot of disgust right now in the United States. I'm even we can study it, disgust. And disgust is a really dangerous emotion, actually. Yeah, I'll drop some more information about this with this podcast episode in the Discord server. When disgust about other people forms in my mind, because of what I know about the emotion of disgust, I immediately work to try to eradicate it because I don't want to feel disgust for others. I know why I am, and it kind of goes back to what, we've already been talking about here, is because I recognize unskillfulness and my reaction, right, my kind of egoic reaction. Again, I'm not talking from judgment here. I'm trying to describe what the Buddha tried to describe, right? About, what's actually happening. The thought process that's happening in our mind as it's happening is to get disgusted. Now, I don't want to spend time feeling disgusted. I don't want to feel disgusted towards others, and I don't want to feel disgusted towards myself. But there's really only one scenario between those two that I actually really have any agency over whatsoever, and that would be the latter. And so, yeah, when I feel disgusted with myself, it's because I know that I behaved unskillfully. And this has come up a lot, since I quit my job. I just had towards the end of my last job, as I've talked before, it was just really time to go. And there was stuff I didn't like that I was seeing, and I wasn't practicing. I wasn't bringing my practice. And so I had to go because I didn't see how to both be there and have my practice. Didn't feel like something that could happen. And since that time, I get to watch in meditation and also in community, I get to watch how my fabricated mind is playing itself out and seeing how it lines up with my previous relationships at work and which of those aspects were helpful for me as well as for others, right? So which of those aspects of my being were actually serving, helping me and helping others, and which were hurting me or hurting others, or both, right? So again, this idea of reflection. And I continue to negotiate that. And I'll tell you something that I find from my perspective, this stuff is really not easy. And again, I think this is why, I just find it so important to, find an admirable friend, because Buddhism is actually very, very different from Western religions. Really different, and so it's hard, it's hard to have conversations with people. We just, it's not about needing to be right or wrong, but it is about missing and wanting an admirable friend. And again, remember that as Buddha puts it, it's not a judgment it's not like that other person isn't admirable. Not at all. It's in the context of whatever path it is that you've chosen for yourself. I've chosen Buddhism. And so for me, in order for me to kind of continue to teach and train my mind, which can easily, flit from thing to thing in the ever-conditioned state, having that voice, you heard what Buddha said, it's the single most important external factor. It's everything. Again, remembering that you're not looking to those voices as voices of dominance over you or authority. There is no authority figure in Buddhism. There is no authority. What's that authority? That's just another device. That's just another, what the hell is that? And, there's the practice of the Eightfold Path, so there's all of these weird paradoxes, right? These strange paradoxes that happen. And so I'm come back 3 days later to record this closer for this episode because I've been really sick, as maybe you can hear in my voice. I don't know. And I'm due to record again today, but I don't think I'm going to be able to hang. So I thought, you know what? The least I can do is drop last week's episode. And so this is a closer. And looking forward to finishing up with the last part of chapter 2. And Happy New Year, if you're listening. May the road rise up. Take care of yourself. Bye.